Imagine putting on your uniform, going into service for your country, and then being told, sorry, your paycheck is delayed because Congress couldn't agree on funding. That's exactly the scene playing out in Washington right now. A growing federal shutdown has put roughly 1.3 million active duty US military personnel in limbo. But then, out of nowhere, a private donor steps in with a staggering $130 mailing gift to pay troops during the blackout. Who is this person? Why does it matter? And what does it say about the intersection of politics, power, and private money in national defense? Today, on the Geo Insight, we'll unpack this moment, the shutdown background, the donor's identity, the legal and ethical ripples, and what this means for US governance and global geopolitics. Stay with us. To understand the donation, we need to go back to how we got here. On the 1st of October 2025, the US federal government entered a shutdown after Congress failed to agree on spending legislation for the next fiscal year. What does the shutdown mean? Key agencies suspend operations, many federal employees are furloughed or told to work without pay, and critical flows of public services get disrupted. In this case, one particularly high-stakes issue emerged: the pay of active duty military personnel, those in uniform, committed to defend US interests around the world. Approximately 1.3 million service members were facing the possibility of missing a mid-October paycheck. The leadership in the White House, seeing the potential morale and readiness fallout, directed the Department of Defense to tap into about $8 billion of unobligated research and development funds to ensure the troops were paid for now. But even with that, the problem wasn't fully solved, and the shutdown dragged on. In that gap of urgency, an unusual donor stepped forward. Why does this matter? Because military funding is traditionally handled through Congress's appropriations process. The moment private money enters, especially at this scale, questions about precedent, legality, and power immediately surface. In mid-October 2025, an announcement shook Washington. The Pentagon accepted an anonymous donation of $130 million to be used to offset service members' salaries and benefits during the shutdown. From the Pentagon's own statement, the donation was made on the condition that it be used to offset the cost of service members' salaries and benefits. Let's unpack those numbers and implications. The US military pays roughly $7.5 billion every 2 weeks to its active duty soldiers and reservists. That means $130 million covers only a tiny slice, less than a day's worth of paychecks. Why? Then, did it cause such a stir? First, the symbolism, private capital, stepping into a sphere normally reserved for government funding. Second, the legal risk. Under federal law, agencies are generally prohibited from spending funds in advance or accepting voluntary services when appropriations are lacking. Third, the optics. This isn't just any donor. It is someone connected to the highest circles of US politics. As we'll get into, that raises questions about influence, accountability, and governance. Behind the curtain of anonymous donor, the name emerged. Timothy Mellon, a reclusive billionaire heir to the Mellon banking fortune. Born into one of America's historic wealth dynasties, Mellon reportedly lives in Wyoming, maintains a low public profile, but has made large contributions to political causes, including for Donald Trump and the Republican Party. According to reports, Mellon is the grandson of former U.S. Treasury Secretary Andrew W. Mellon. His personal net worth is estimated between $700 million to $4 billion, while the family's collective worth is around $14. He has donated tens and hundreds of millions to political causes, super PACs, and controversial initiatives. None of this is inherently problematic until we connect the dots. A major political donor, aligned with the current administration, gives $130 million to the federal military, while the government is in crisis. President Trump described the donor as a great gentleman and a great patriot, yet said the individual preferred anonymity. So, what do we ask? What's the motivation? Is it pure philanthropy, political leverage, public relations, or a mix of all three? And how does this reshape the relationship between private money and public service? Here's where the story gets more than just curious. It becomes complicated. The donation, while seemingly benevolent, brings up several legal and ethical concerns. 1. Appropriations and constitutional law. The U.S. Constitution vests spending power in Congress. Normally, the military is funded through appropriations bills, not philanthropic gifts. Federal law prohibits spending in advance or without proper appropriation and from accepting voluntary services, except in emergencies. 2. Precedent and accountability. If private individuals can tip in large sums when the government fails, what precedent does this set? Could factions steer funding toward friendly units, programs, or policies? 3. Transparency and influence. The donor is politically connected. Could this gift shift how military funding or readiness decisions are made, or how the military is perceived? 4. Scale versus impact. As we noted, $130 million is significant in absolute terms, but trivial compared to the roughly $7.5 billion biweekly payroll. So while symbolically powerful, its practical effect is limited. 5. Governance and morale. For troops waiting for pay, the donation offers relief. But for other federal workers, civilian agencies, contractors, questions may linger. Who covers those not in uniform? In short, this gift may patch a gap, but it raises more questions than it answers about power, purpose, and process. From a domestic lens, this episode sharpens the partisan hammering in Washington. The shutdown itself underscores the gridlock between the House, Senate, and White House. The donor's identity and connection to Trump elevate the issue from fiscal to political. Is this wartime support or influence peddling? But there are also geopolitical ripples. The U.S. military is a global institution. Overseas bases, alliances, deterrence, and deployment all depend on readiness and perception. A glitching troop pay signals vulnerability. By stepping in privately, this donor bypasses standard democratic budgeting processes. That raises questions in capitals around the world. If U.S. military financing becomes entangled with private dollars, does it affect decision-making, operational independence, or alliances? Furthermore, adversaries may exploit the optics. If U.S. military personnel are unpaid or reliant on philanthropy, the narrative of U.S. strength weakens. In hybrid warfare, perception often matters as much as missiles. Finally, there is the influence of wealth in politics. When billionaires can intervene directly in defense matters, the boundary between public interest and private strategy becomes blurred. Other nations watching the U.S. might either defend against similar dynamics or exploit them. So, where do we go from here? Several possible trajectories. Congressional response. The shutdown must end. Appropriations must pass, and funding must be restored. If not, the private donor route may proliferate or draw congressional pushback or new laws to prevent it. Legal challenges. The legal concerns may lead to oversight hearings, investigations, or even litigation. Will the donor face scrutiny? Will the Pentagon clarify how the funds were used or tracked? Military morale and culture. How will personnel view this? For some, the donation could be a morale booster. Someone cares. For others, it may feel like a patchwork solution when pay by the government should be guaranteed. Precedent setting. If other wealthy individuals see this as a model, will private defense funding become a trend? That brings questions of equity, control, and sovereignty. International perception, allies and adversaries will watch. This may shift how U.S. readiness is perceived and how reliant it is on stable governance versus ad hoc philanthropy. At the operational level, remember, $130 million is a drop in the bucket. compared to total defense spending, but the symbolism is massive. Could this moment become a turning point for how military pay, funding, and politics intersect? In summary, the US government shutdown has exposed a structural vulnerability in how one of the world's most powerful militaries is funded. Into that breach stepped a private donor, Timothy Mellon, with a $130 million gift. It appears heroic. It may have helped some troops, but it also raises deeper concerns about accountability, governance, transparency, and the sway of money in state affairs. For global watchers of geopolitics, this story is a mirror. If the world's preeminent military must accept private largesse mid-shutdown, the assumptions of state power and fiscal discipline crack open. As always, you'll want to watch how Congress reacts, how the Pentagon answers questions, how service members respond, and how allies and adversaries recalibrate. This is the Geo Insight, where global affairs meet sharp context. If you found this breakdown helpful, go ahead and hit the like button, subscribe, and ring the notification bell so you don't miss our future deep dives. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next video.